What is up, guys? So in the previous episode, we worked on this in this project. We finished doing our sidebar. We continued that. If you want to go ahead and check that video out, go ahead and check that out in the playlist. In this episode, we're going to be getting into the context. Okay, we're going to be getting into React hooks, context API, and all that good stuff. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing in this one. So the first thing we got to do for this, well, let me give you a rundown of how we want this to go. So when we click the login, right? So right now the buttons don't work, but the idea is that when we click the login, we want a login module, to come down and have a little fancy little drop down. Okay, and the same with the register. When we click on the register, we want it to toggle it basically, and have the register module come down. Okay, so we want to do that for the both one. But in this video, we're just gonna be working on seeing if we can get the login going. Because once we get the login going, we can get the register going. Okay, but we won't do anything fancy with the login, like creating the module just yet. We want to just make sure that our toggle is working within our state in the context API. Okay, so we want to make sure we get that going before we dive in deep into creating the modal. Sorry, I said module. I meant modal. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to create a state context. So the state context is going to have all of our state in there. Okay, now we're going to have that in a different file. Okay, so it's going to be on the root source file, folder, I should say. And we're going to create one called state context. If I can spell, I can't spell. .js. Okay, so this is where all of our state is going to be. All right, so we can close that sidebar for now. Now the next thing we want to do is of course import React. Right, so import React. Actually, I can use my shorthand and do imrc. It imports React. We don't need the component because this is going to be a functional component here. We're going to need to grab the create context function from React. Alright, so the next thing we got to do is that we have to create our context. And our context is basically initializing what's going to be our state. Okay, so we're going to do export cons. We're going to export this so we can use it in other files that we want to access our state from. So we got to export it. So we're going to call this state context, just like the name above. Okay, and it's going to be equal to create context, like this, right? So now that we have that, now we have to we basically have to create our provider. Well, basically it's a functional component, I should say. That's actually what it is. So what we have to do is we can call this component anything we want, just like how function is the app, and we can just call it anything we want. But we want to export this so we can use it as well. So we'll export state. I'll call this provider. Well, I have to do const, of course. Const. Okay. It's equal to an arrow function. Okay. Now this is going to return, just like any other component, functional component, it's going to return something. Okay. So in this state provider, this is what we're going to use to wrap our app in. So our whole entire app can use this state. Okay. So this is how we're going to do it. First, we have to set a state that we're going to use by default. Okay, now in order to use the state, you know how in class components, you use this dot state and then put all, which is an object, and you put all of your state in it. Well, in hooks, in React hooks, you actually use something called use state. Okay, and that's from React. Okay, this is a React hook. Now, in order to create the state, the initial state, what we got to do is do const state. We can call this anything we want. I'm just calling it to make it easier. State and set state. And set state. Now the state, basically the state in the class component is basically saying this dot state. So if we wish to do this dot state equals, an object, just like how you do with classes. This dot state is this right here. So this is basically what it is. Alright? And then the set state is basically this one. This dot set state. Okay, let me comment that out. But it's basically like the same thing that we do in class components, okay? So this set state is basically what this one is. And this one would be to change the state. So this set state is a function to change whatever state you want to change inside the state, which is this dot state. So I hope that makes sense. And then we're basically destructuring right now. So we're grabbing these components. Grabbing both of these out of the use state method that we have in our React. Okay. Now we can pass in a initial state, which is basically saying what's the initial state for this dot state. So we're saying that we have the login toggle is going to be one of our initial states, and that's going to be set with false by default. Okay, so like I said, it's basically saying login toggle set to false. Okay, so this is basically what it looks like right now. All right. Now the next thing we want to do is, now that we have that, now this is basically our state right here. This is our initial state. Okay, we didn't use set state yet, but this is our initial state right here. All right, so now we have to pass this state inside of our provider so our app can use all of this when we wrap it. Okay, so you'll see what I mean in a second. Now we have to create our provider. So we'll go state provider dot, nope, state provider, sorry, not dot, but just state provider, right? And then we pass in the children. Okay, so the children is basically when we wrap this component here, our children is whatever is inside of it. Okay, now I have destructured this, so you have to pass it in here, because usually you would do props. It would take in the props, and you'll do not this dot props. It'll take in the props, and then you'll do props dot children, like that. So it basically means the same thing. Whatever you wrap, whatever you put inside of this state provider, the state will, the initial state that we put in here is gonna get that state as well. Okay, it's gonna have access to that state, but we're gonna destructure it and just do this and just grab the children right out of it. That way we can just say children, like that. Okay, Now, I'm sorry, I messed that up. It's not state provider. It's the state context. Sorry about that. Totally messed that up. Sorry. State context is what you want to have as the wrapper. And then when you do state context dot provider, you have it like that, then you wrap the children. Okay, sorry about that, because you want to use the state context, right? So the state context is basically what's the state gonna be, and then you're gonna pass in what the state is gonna be with the value prop that it takes, and you're basically saying that the state is gonna be the whole array that's destructured. We're gonna have state and then set state. Okay, so you're passing in this whole thing, right? Which means it's passing in our whole initial state, which is only login toggle right now. But this whole state is getting passed into our provider. Our state context dot provider takes in this whole state. Now when we go here, when we wrap this whole thing, the state provider, into our app, it's gonna accept this state as well. Okay, so sorry if I'm jabbering and it doesn't make sense, but you'll see in a second. So now that we have that done, we come over here and we want to import that state provider. Provider from state context. Now when we come over here and do state provider, and then we just wrap all of this in here, and then we take that out. Okay, so now our whole app is getting this state. Okay, our whole app has access to this state now. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is we're going to go to our home component. As you can see right here, our home component right here. We're going to go to our home component. Where is it? Pages. So we're going to go to our home component, and now we're going to conditionally render our login module. Okay. Now that might seem a little confusing, like what? But I'll show you in a second how we're going to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab that state Okay, let me show you. Let me do it and then I'll explain it. So we're going to import the state. Did I call it context like this? I think I did. From state context. Make sure I named it right. Oh no, it's capital. I mean, it's camel case. Like that. Okay. So now we're having access to this context. And our context is basically the state. So we have access to it now in this component. So what we want to do is we want to grab that state. So we will do const, not the set state because we're not changing anything in this component. We just want to grab the initial state. So we only grab the state, and then we'll say use context. Oh, I can do a shortcut. I can say use context like that, right? And we're gonna grab, oh crap, we're gonna grab the state from it. And the reason why it's probably it's throwing an error is because we have to use it here as well. We have to grab the use context hook from React. Okay. Now the context that we're trying to grab is our state context that we created here. Okay. That's the one we're trying to grab. And we're just trying to get the state out of that. Not the set state, but just the initial state. Alright. So now here, what we want to do is we want to conditionally render the login module, like I said before. And how you do conditional rendering is you'll go state, which is accessing the initial state, dot login toggle, because that's what we called it. State.login toggle. So state.login toggle right there. That's what it's referring to, okay? Now you say, we're doing a ternary operator. So you say state.login. Basically you're saying if there is a, if it's set to true, because it's a Boolean, right? So it's set to false by default. Now if state.login is set to true, then we want to render our login modal. Ooh, sorry about that, sneezing. Alright. Now I think we have to put the little slash in the front. Sorry, but my sneezing allergies are terrible. Okay. Else, we render nothing. Okay. So by default, it's false. So the state login toggle is false. So it would render nothing. Okay. But if the login toggle was set to true, then it would render our login module. Okay. Now the login module is going to say not defined because we didn't import it yet. So let's import that. I thought it was going to auto import, but I guess not. Import login modal from component / login modal. Like that, right? Okay, now what we want to do, what our idea is here, just let me get let me like refresh it real quick. When we click this login button is going to be the button that toggles our login toggle from true to false to true to false. Okay, now based on that, it's going to toggle this. So it's going to say true, then login, false, nothing. If it's true, then show the login. If not, show nothing. Okay? Now, in our sidebar, which is where this login button is placed at, we'll go to our sidebar here. Sidebar component. Right? And then we're going to import our state context again because we want to use the state. We're going to use some state from our context. So we got to import that here as well. God, I can't spell worth of crap. Context. And from state.context, right? So in this one, we want to use the state and the set state, because we're going to be changing the state back and forth due to this login button, which is right here, okay? So we're going to grab that by doing state, set, well, we don't have to call it that. We could call it, we can call it login. You can call it login and then call it SetLogin. You can call it anything you want. Set login. Like that. Right? And you want to grab these values out of our context. So we're going to say up here, we got to import that. Use context hook. And then we're going to say use context. And then the state.context, okay? Our state.context, all right? So now we have access to our initial state and setting the state, okay? So what we want to do here is that we want to create a button. Well, we already created the button, but we want to create a method that toggles true to false on our login. So we'll say const toggle login is going to be equal to an arrow function, of course. And then what we want to do is call the SetLogin method. Okay, remember this SetLogin is the method to change whatever the state is. Okay, so when we do this, we call it like a regular method, and then we pass in the object. And because in our, as you know, in our context, it's an object right here. So then we want to copy the state because we don't want to mutate the whole state directly. Well, I should say the login. This is basically our state. So let me rename that just so it can make sense. Because the login is our state, but it looks weird if we copy the login. We want to copy the state. Okay? And then change anything that we want. Change any property that we want inside that state. So we want to update the login toggle, which we specified here. So we're just updating this. It's set to false. Now, when we click this button, we want this login toggle to be set to true. Okay? And of course you can do it like this, which a lot of people do. You can do, it's going to be the opposite of whatever the state dot login toggle is. You know, people do that. But for my reading purposes, because it looks more better when you actually put the actual Boolean in there instead of doing this multiple times. I kind of like it. I don't know, it's more readable if I just do it to true, and then if I toggle it again to close the model, it'll be set to false again. So you could do it either way, but I'm just going to do it this way. So it's set with false by default, but when we click this button, it's now set to true. Okay? Set state. And you use that, you do that by using the set state method that the use context lets you have, okay? So now, I hope this is all making sense. Now what you want to do is that when you click this login button, it's going to toggle that, and now the login toggle should be to true instead of false like we initially set it. Okay? So we're going to do on click handler for this button. I'm going to pass in the toggle login like that. And just so you can see what it is, we're going to console.log the state, because now the state should be updated, because we used the set state to update the state. So now when we console.log it, it should have the new value of what we updated it to. So the login toggle should be set to true on the updated state. Okay. So let's see if that works. Let's see if we did that right. Alright, so here, I'm going to go to the inspect here. Console, what error do we have? Oh, the class name. Let's fix that real quick. Where is it in the notes? Oh yeah, okay, so change that to class name. There we go. Okay, so now exit that out. Now let's see if we get it. Okay, so we click the login button. Ooh, get an error. Alright, let's see what this error is. You see it says false, but if we was to click it again, it would have said true. Let's see. Let's see what we did wrong here. Pretty sure we did most of it right. Let me see. What error is it giving us? Warning, red dot, type is invalid. Check your code. Oh, okay. At home, 11. Let's see. Oh, so it's the home one. That we messed up on. Or okay, so you probably gotta like debug this real quick. Okay, so let's just console.log. Let me see if I can console.log the state. See, it's doing it, but we're still getting the error. Let me take that out real quick. Okay, so it's doing it, but it doesn't look like it's updating the state. So let me see. If I go home, let me see what the state is in this home component. Okay, it's set to false, which is good. But then when we go to our sidebar, let me say updated state. So the updated state should be, when we click the button, it should be true. But let's see. So it's false at the home. When we click the login, it's still false. But it changed to true. So wait, let me see. Now it's true, true. Okay. Okay, for now, I'm going to do it this way. Do the state dot login toggle. So whatever the state is, the opposite of it. So switching back and forth from the login, the toggle, doing it this way. because it's probably throwing an error. So yeah, see, it goes back and forth. By default, it's false. When we click the button, it's still false, but then now the login is true. Updated state is true. Click it again, it's false. So it's somewhat doing it. Yeah, we basically got it down. Clear that off. Updated state is true. The login is false. Now it's false and the login is true. But now that I'm thinking, like, if we updated it and the login toggle is true, which is here, which means we can see it, but the home is still at false. And you still get an error when you do that. So let's see. Let's see. See what's going on here. That looks about right. I mean, it does. It only acts weird when I put the. So if I do state.login toggle, what do I get? It's false. Which is correct. Make sure I didn't spell it like differently. Login toggle, okay. Now the login modal, where's the modal? No, we don't have anything for the modal. Okay. That's probably why it's giving us that error. So if we create just a functional component here and just put anything like that, you see it and then you don't. Okay, see? Now that works. It's because we didn't have anything in there, but it is working. That's why I was throwing the error. We didn't have anything in there. Okay. Probably should have did that first, but it's okay. We figured it out. That's good. So it is working. The toggle part is working. So in what our mission is at this point is from our home, since it's doing the conditional rendering, if it's true, it's going to show the login modal. So if we click it in, it's true. we're going to have the modal drop down appear, and then we're going to have a button inside the modal that's it's like an X, and then when we click that X, it's going to trigger it to turn back to false, and then we won't see it. Okay, so that's our idea of how we're going to do that. We probably might do that in the next video. We might get the actual because we're going to use animations for the login, so we're probably going to get the login modal animation going, get that looking nice using Tailwind, and then we'll be able to see like how it toggles back and forth. Okay, so that's probably what we'll do in the next one. But in this one, I just wanted to get our context working, our context API working, making sure we were doing that correctly. But yeah, so basically, just for like a short recap, we created our state context file, and then within the state context file, we created a context, which means that we're gonna have data, the initial data and whatnot, and then we created a functional component that takes in children as props, and then in that functional component, the children is whatever we pass in to this provider. Okay, and then what we did for this state provider is that we passed in the data of our initial state. Okay, so anything within the children has access to our state that we created using the use state. Okay, so all of this state is passed in through our provider within our context provider. Okay, and then the state provider is what wraps our app in it, and now our whole app has access to that state from the state provider component. Okay, and then from there we went into our sidebar and we created a method to update the state from having our login toggle from true to false, so back and forth updating the state from true to false, and we use that using the set state, and we had that in our login button. Okay, now in our home is where we do our conditional rendering. So if we click on that login button, it's going to, based on true or false, it's going to render our login modal. Okay, and we basically just access our state by using our state context. Okay, we accessed only the state just to get the default value, and then once it toggles back and forth, it affects this area as well to render our login modal. So I hope that made sense. I really hope that did. So yeah, like I said, in the next one we'll work on getting our login modal to look decent, and then from there, I'm not sure what's gonna happen, what video we're gonna get to after the login modal, after we get done animating it. Probably the register, of course. Yeah, so that's the plan for the next one. Okay, plan for the next video: get our login modal animation going and having that toggle back and forth instead of having this hello toggle back and forth. We'll have our modal. Okay, so that's for the next one, and I will see you guys in that one. And I hope you guys like this. If you do, go ahead and hit that like button, and yeah, I'll see you guys.